What's up, everybody? And today we're checking out some Task and Purpose. They uploaded a video 8 days ago called Chinese Troops Deployed to Poland's Border. I've been sent this one a couple times. Very interesting. I haven't heard anything about this anywhere on the news or social media or anything like that. And so this video is going to be super interesting. It's like 14 minutes long. So sit down, let's watch this, let's learn. It's almost as if every day there's a new thing that's making me worry about World War III kicking off, isn't there? So yeah, let's watch this. Let's see what's going on here in China. Task and Purpose. If you haven't already subscribed to their channel, then I don't know what you're doing. Link down below to the original video. Go over to Task and Purpose, give them a like, a subscribe, all that good stuff. Yeah, what are my predictions with this? I think the China are really putting a lot of money into their military right now. I think that they are definitely getting very aggressive on their borders, and we've seen that with the India-China border. So this is going to be interesting. Let's watch it, and before we make any presumptions, let's watch it and figure out what's going on.
In July 2024, China transported soldiers 3,000 miles away into Belarus. They conducted joint training exercises only 1.5 miles away from NATO member Poland's border and 40 miles away from the border with Ukraine.
China's joint military exercises with Russia and Belarus coming just days after NATO's strongest denunciation of Beijing.
Does this mean it's time to sound the alarmist alarm? The Chinese are coming! The Chinese are coming!
What this probably is it's probably Russia being like, look, NATO is really pushing our borders. Can you come and like bolster our borders to show a bit of, you know, a bit of our control in the area?
The reason this has made world news headlines is because of the implication. Beijing hasn't done a mission like this since 2015. So the timing of the drill indicates that the CCP is sending a warning message to the United States that they're prepared to
not to the United States, to NATO.
Deploy troops to fight against NATO in Europe. Keep in mind, the United States military routinely conducts much larger training missions near the border of China and Russia.
Yeah.
Russia has also recently ran a submarine mission to their allies in Cuba, right near the United States. But I think the reason this otherwise routine mission can shock people today is because of the rhetoric that we hear around it. The deputy head of the General Staff of the Belarusian Armed Forces said that the maneuvers were in response to the West's aggressive foreign...
Yeah, again, I know exactly what he's going to say. It's because of the aggression of NATO, he's going to say. And they have every right to do it. Like, let's be honest. NATO do push and do a lot of exercise on the border for obvious reasons. And so it only makes sense that they're going to do it.
Policy towards Belarus and to Ukrainian provocation. Meanwhile, NATO recently met in Washington, D.C., where they released a joint statement calling China a decisive enabler of Russia's war, and that China is currently engaged in enabling the largest land war in Europe in recent history. Beijing responded saying the accusations were lies and smears, and said that the exercises weren't aimed at any single country. This sounds like the geopolitical version of high school gossip, but it begs the question.
Could China actually fight a land war in Europe?
No.
How many troops could the CCP...
Well, no, they could. They could, but they wouldn't, because I think China, just like Russia, are a lot more talk than anything else. I really do. And no, don't get me wrong, I think China are a more formidable force than Russia. I just think that they are a lot of talk. And they love to show aggression. I don't think if push comes to shove and there was a war, I don't think China or Russia would be able to defeat Europe, never mind America. I don't think either of them would. I think it would be a horrible, horrible war, but I don't think they could
deploy and sustain that far away from their border. To answer that, we need to take a look at 3 key areas of the Chinese military: strategic airlift, sea and ground transportation. But first, I want to talk to you about the folks that made this video possible. HelloFresh, America's
let's get through the ad.
That's slightly smaller than the American C-7 cargo
Let's see
plane.
if we missed you.
We'll start with strategic airlift. China sent one single Y-20 cargo plane to Belarus. For context, that's slightly smaller than the American C-17 transport.
Okay.
So we can actually assume that it can carry a similar amount of 188 soldiers. No tanks or armor was sent on the training exercise. According to China's Ministry of National Defense, they conducted a, quote, anti-terror training mission that included things like hostage rescue, urban combat, and water crossings.
I mean, if they only sent 180 people, then it's not that big of a deal, is it really? Like, if they sent like tanks, I mean, look at some of the exercises that the US and NATO does in Europe in that area, there's some pretty big exercises that they do, aren't there? I mean, look at the one that's just happened with the Nordic countries. You get some big exercises. I get it, though. It's like home territory, isn't it? So they're able to do it. But, like, China only sending 180 troops. I don't think it's that big of a scare, is it, really?
Not sure what type of terror group you're fighting where you need to train on contested river crossings, but
Yeah.
okay, fair enough. The Y-20 has a payload capacity of 66 tons, so it can potentially carry 2 light tanks or 1 main battle tank. Since 2016, you probably haven't heard of this, but China has quietly built a fleet of 67 Y-20s. This has gotten exactly zero attention, though, because they don't do sexy things like fighters that fire off missiles. But in many ways, their strategic implication is much bigger.
Because of the implication.
That's actually a lot, though. They could shift a lot of gear if they really wanted to then, couldn't they?
China is now one of only 4 nations in the entire world to manufacture a 200-ton military transport jet. If you want to project power and fight wars abroad, acquiring this asset is the first step. This actually isn't the first time we've seen them in Europe. In April of 2022, military observers were surprised to see 6 of these Chinese Y-20s land in Nikola Tesla International Airport inside Serbia. According to the Serbian president, Beijing delivered unto him FK-3 surface-to-air missiles. These are the export variant of China's HQ-22 SAM. It's kind of...
I'm wondering whether they're going to start having more training and operations in that area. It would make sense. I think Russia and China are probably chatting and being like, look, NATO's really pushing this aggression on our border. Why don't we just do the same just to counteract it? I think that it would backfire because a lot of the countries that aren't Russia that are touching European countries are really small countries, right? And so there's more of a worry that if something goes wrong in these exercises, there's more implications because it's a small country. Does that make sense? Like if they shot a missile and it went off direct course or whatever, like there's more of a reason for it to be worrying because the countries that they're doing the exercise in are small. Whereas in Europe, if you do something in, I don't know, in Finland, like there's a lot more countries around it that are NATO. And so I think that, I don't know. I think escalation on either side is probably not a good idea, but we're in the climate we're in right now, aren't we, unfortunately?
Like the Russian S-300, the point is China isn't focusing their airlift to deploy troops. So far, they're mainly using it to transport weapons and equipment. China has 20 of the similar Russian-produced IL-76 cargo planes that can carry 2 lightweight armored trucks, no tanks, and 130 troops. What all that means is that with their current capabilities, China could fly 12,000 soldiers to Russia or Belarus if they absolutely needed to. That's roughly 2 brigades, but this doesn't include armored vehicles. A typical armored brigade has at least 80 main battle tanks, 18 self-propelled artillery vehicles, 150 infantry fighting vehicles, and 100 armored trucks and logistic vehicles. So, it would take China's entire strategic airlift fleet 10 round trips to deploy 2 brigades. Moving that many troops and equipment with those assets would take over a month. But I might be being far too generous with those estimates, because
That is a cool t-shirt. I like that t-shirt a lot.
I spoke with an active duty U.S. Army officer who works in logistics in strategic airlift, and he said, quote, "Assuming all 67 Y-20s are available and fully mission capable, the PLA could airlift 8,978 soldiers in one go. While this is a lot of light infantry, it brings up a lot more questions. Where are they going to land? Every airbase and airport has a limited amount of aircraft they can realistically store, service, and maintain.
Yeah.
This number is known as the maximum on ground and is typically measured from the aircraft's wingtips and added amount of length on each side in order to allow for the bird to maneuver on the ground. And where are all these 9,000 soldiers going to eat, sleep, and shit? Adding all 9,000 soldiers will immediately jump the local population by an emotionally significant amount. In order for this to work, the PLA will have to painstakingly negotiate an agreement with Belarus. Another logistics soldier I spoke to said, quote, "The heavier you load an aircraft with cargo, the more wear and tear occurs."
Can we just applaud Task and Purpose to get these quotes and to get this information? But he's not wrong. This officer's not wrong. Like, it's not a case of just sending people. Like, there's so much stuff that has to be done. weapons, ammo, rations, med packs, everything, radio gear. Like, there's so much logistics involved.
So you often have to trade off range for cargo capacity.
Yeah.
Some aircraft may have to be tasked to support and recover aircraft with maintenance issues, to fly both specialists and parts to fix non-mission capable aircraft. So what he's saying is that not all those 67 Y-20s can be dedicated to just flying combat power there.
Yeah.
You also need to dedicate some of them to support roles. But we're forgetting about a whole nother major problem before we even get there. Mid-air refueling. When fully loaded, China's Y-20 has a max range that's reduced down from 7,000 kilometers to 3,700 kilometers.
Holy shit.
The closest point from Belarus to China is the capital in Xinjiang, which is 4,600 kilometers. These numbers come straight from the Chinese media publications themselves, who spoke to Zhu Chan, who's the head of their aviation industry corporation. The article claims fully loaded Y-20s would be restricted to domestic operations in China.
Wow.
This is why they
So this is something we really don't need to worry about then at all.
would need mid-air refueling for many of these missions. But there's another problem. Currently, China doesn't have any major mid-air refueling capabilities like the 400 refueler tankers that America currently has. They just started manufacturing versions of the Y-20, the U variant, for refueling. China also doesn't have any of the giant American C-5 or Russian AN-124 cargo aircraft, which can carry twice the capacity at 140 tons, so they can carry 2 tanks instead of 1.
It just goes to show how advanced America is when it comes to this stuff. Like, they're so far ahead of any other country that China, who's probably like the US's biggest adversary, it used to be Russia, I don't think it is anymore, it's still like leagues behind America, aren't there? And even if you combined all of Europe, I think if you combined all of Europe, right, NATO without America, basically, I think that is a bigger powerhouse than China and Russia combined. Easily.
What all of this means is that China's current airlift capacity would struggle to support a limited war in Europe.
Yeah.
The assessment is backed up by the U.S.-China Economic and Security Review Commission, which was created by the United States Congress to research the Chinese military, among other things. They state that in their report on China's power projection, quote, in the medium term, next 10 to 15 years or so by like 2035, the People's Liberation Army aims to be capable of fighting a limited war overseas to protect its interest in countries participating in the Belt and Road Initiative. By mid-century, though, the PLA aims to be capable of rapidly deploying forces anywhere in the world. Roger Cliff.
That's kind of worrying that they are trying to aim for that in the future. But I also think it means that there's no intention for China to kick off anytime soon. And you know that that's the case because they've been so quiet with the whole Russia-Ukraine and the whole Israel-Gaza. They've been really quiet, and I think they're just sitting back. I think they're just strengthening their own military, and they're trying to not worry about anything until they're in a position where they're confident that they can compete with every other country in the world. And right now they can't.
Wrote a great publication titled China's Future Military Capabilities for the U.S. Army War College. In it, he stated, China's Air Force does not currently appear to be aiming to become a global power projection force. The acquisition of aerial refueling aircraft appears to be a lesser priority. The PLA Air Force does not yet possess heavy bombers, and the acquisition of airlift aircraft appears to be intended primarily to support the wartime requirements of air transportation as opposed to expeditionary air operations. What all of that means is that when we look at their airlift capabilities, they're entirely designed and focused on supporting a war against Taiwan or their near abroad. But just because strategic airlift isn't quite ready for Beijing, what other options might they have at their disposal? Let's take a look at ground transportation. The PLA could use the Trans-Siberian.
You know how long that is? I feel like that wouldn't work because the journey, right, would consume so many support, roles and supplies that by the time they get there, like, they're going to have nothing. You know how far that is?
And railway, they would have to first load tanks and troops onto ships, then offload them at Vladivostok before moving them by rail about 9,300 kilometers across Russia. And there's another overland option as well. This is the Chongqing Xinjiang European Railway. I think I said that.
Did you hear his pause then? Did you hear his pause when he was trying to pronounce all that?
Well, this is the Chongqing Xinjiang European Railway. I think I said that correctly. God bless me. It takes about 16 days to travel the roughly 11,000 kilometers from China to Belarus through this route. If China needed to deploy troops into Europe, this is another potential overland route. However, it's already used by 30 trains each day for trade and economic activity from China to Europe. So it would have to be some kind of cataclysmic, world-ending emergency event to see the potential militarization of these routes.
Yeah.
The railway infrastructure is designed for cargo, not troop movements. There's also a lot of weight limitations on these tracks, and it would require some significant modifications to freight cars to pull off sending tanks and equipment, military variety through there. China would also...
I think it does boost the confidence of Europe knowing that they're not this adequate, right? Again, it's all talk. Russia were so much all about all talk, and then they tried to invade Ukraine, and they've been absolutely terrible. And I think China are the same.
So need to coordinate and get permission from Kazakhstan where their rail passes through. So there's also geopolitical concerns here.
Yeah.
But it wouldn't be insurmountable because Kazakhstan and Russia and China are all founding members of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, which is actually the group that Belarus just joined. So it's a big reason why these training exercises are happening in the first place.
Yeah, so that is their kind of fight against, like, trying to do their own NATO, isn't it? From what I've heard.
The active duty U.S. Army logistics officer that I spoke to had this to say about the railway route. This would allow the PLA to deploy more soldiers, more supplies, and even heavier equipment. This could work for a short training deployment, but would be wholly inadequate during a longer deployment and even worse during combat operations. The extreme distance between mainland China and Belarus would force the PLA to rely on a predictive style of resupply, push method, and not a responsive style, pull method. This would either overburden units with more rations, ammunition, and repair parts than they can consume, or, more likely, not enough. We already know in 2021, China sent troops, tanks, and equipment through rail into Russia. They were there to participate in the International Army Games, kind of like the Olympics, but for war.
Yeah.
But they didn't go very far. They just traveled right across the border in the Mongolia Autonomous Region.
There'd be all kinds of red tape.
I don't think that they're adequate enough to do that travel. In fact, I think they're more adequate to do the air travel than they are to do the rail travel because it's such a long journey. People don't realize how far that journey is. And if you think about, like, yes, it has to go through Kazakhstan, which is its own kind of, like he said, a political movement. But moving trains with this amount of cargo on top of it, and the thing is, it's not just going to be one train, it's going to be loads. If there was a full-scale war, it would be train after train after train, right? Them tracks would get demolished with this amount of weight on it. They really would. I don't think they're capable of doing this at all.
And problems with trying to militarize a trade route, a railway like that. So what if China tried to go over sea instead?
When it comes to China's sea lift capabilities, they have 3 Type 75 transport ships that can move 800 soldiers and 2 operational aircraft carriers. But there isn't really a route that they could take to Europe because going east to the Bering Strait through there wouldn't really work since the Arctic Ocean isn't navigable most of the year. It's not impossible, but it's unlikely Turkey would allow China to transport troops through the Bosphorus River.
They would not go through the Red Sea. It would just not happen. I guarantee it would not happen.
That they control. The CCP currently doesn't have a blue water navy or the foreign relationships necessary to transport soldiers that far away. But supporting soldiers abroad is about much more than just getting them there. You have to be able to send spare parts for when the vehicles break down. You got to be able to send fuel, tools, food, and ammunition thousands of miles away too.
This is why the US has put a lot of bases in Europe, and it makes complete sense. Because if it did kick off in Europe, they've already got the infrastructure. They've already got a lot of equipment, a lot of supplies. They've got a place to take them supplies. All it is at that point is just shipping stuff over, which wouldn't be much for the US. It would just be a blip on their radar of logistics. Let's be honest.
Loading and unloading, sending all of this is called railhead operations. The railhead operations are dangerous, time-consuming, and an all-around nightmare.
Yeah.
Conducting them requires an enormous amount of training, skill, and specific transportation equipment. It's nothing like riding a bike. Once you do it, You need to continue to do it and train on it to be able to do it correctly.
Yeah.
Even with practicing these
Not to mention, if anything goes wrong and one gets derailed, everything behind it gets blocked. Everything.
things all the time. Between 2006 and 2018, 31% of active duty U.S. military deaths were results of accidents on things like
Holy.
these kind of transportation operations. It would take 2 months at least to move a similar size 2 brigades this method, especially without any of the infrastructure or training ahead of time.
Yeah.
But China will continue to grow their power projection abilities. In 2016, Zhu Qin of the Aviation Industry Corporation of China stated that they needed more than 1,000 of the Y-20s, and it's likely China will have 100 of them by 2032.
The truth is they are going to bolster their own stuff, aren't they? And they're trying to do it as much as possible, as quick as possible.
In order to match the United States airlift capabilities, though, they would need well over 230 of them and another 100 refuelers. The assessment of China reaching these capabilities by 2035 or 2040 seems to be on track with the rate at which the CCP is producing transport aircraft. But I'm curious to know what you think of my assessment. Was there a transportation route or outside-the-box method that you can think of that I missed?
Let him finish it off
Do I have
real
my
quick.
head really far up my ass? And be sure to check out one of these videos before you go.
Yeah, I don't think China have any leg to stand on when it comes to fighting Europe. I think if there was any war between China and Europe or NATO, I think it would be more cyber and airstrikes. I do not think they'd be sending troops. And if they did send troops, it would take forever. It really would. And it would be a logistical nightmare. I wouldn't be surprised if they have some sort of plan with Russia to have some sort of base. But at the same time, I don't think Russia are up for stuff like that. They're very defensive, aren't they? So who knows? I just don't think that... I think that China, Russia, I think a lot of these countries big themselves up more than they actually are, right? Like Russia's the biggest example of this, and I think China's the same. I think China's military is more advanced in the cyber area than anything else, and I think missiles Russia are very advanced in, but a lot of them are old now. So unlike the US is already on top and they're just updating. China has to catch up, and then by the time it catches up, it's already got to start updating the stuff that they first made. I just don't think it's going to happen for a very, very long time, which is good. Which is a good thing. I think this video has boosted my thoughts on something bad not happening anytime soon. Let me know what you think in the comment section down below. I'd love to know your thoughts. I'll leave a link down below to Task and Purpose's video. Go and check it out. Absolutely brilliant. They're always amazing. Until next time, I love you all. Have a wonderful day. Goodbye.